The Apache Fugitive said, "You gave me your bed, rancher. Get ready for what comes next." The sun was setting over the Arizona desert, casting long golden shadows across Samuel Harding's ranch. The land stretched endlessly, dry and dusty, with only a few twisted mesquite trees breaking the flat horizon. Samuel, a man in his early 50s, moved slowly along the corral, checking each fence post and making sure the cattle were safe for the night. Life on the ranch was hard, but Samuel had learned to live with the loneliness and the quiet, broken only by the wind, the occasional coyote, or the lowing of his cows. He had grown used to it, and he liked the peace it gave him. Samuel lived alone. His wife had passed many years ago, and his children had moved to the city in search of a different life. The ranch had been in his family for generations, and Samuel had learned to manage it all by himself. He was a careful man, methodical in his work, and careful to avoid unnecessary risks. Every tool had its place, every cow had its schedule, and every evening he would sit on his porch watching the sun sink behind the distant hills. But tonight, something felt different. There was a strange stillness in the air, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. He had just finished feeding the horses when the wind picked up, carrying a cloud of dust that made him squint. The sky, once clear and blue, was now streaked with shades of orange and red, turning to dark gray as storm clouds gathered. A storm was coming. Samuel knew it would be violent, as these desert storms often were. Short, sudden, and fierce. He hurried to secure the barn doors, tying ropes to keep them from swinging in the wind, and checked on the animals one last time. Everything seemed in order, yet an uneasy feeling gnawed at him. Then he heard it, a faint noise coming from the edge of his property, near the old windmill. At first he thought it was the wind, whistling through the wooden beams, but the sound persisted, soft but deliberate. It was the shuffle of footsteps in the sand. Samuel's hand instinctively went to the rifle by the barn door. He had faced wild animals before, and he knew not to underestimate the desert's dangers. Slowly he stepped outside, the wind whipping dust into his face, and looked into the dimming horizon. There, stumbling through the sand, was a man. He moved awkwardly, as if every step caused pain. His clothes were torn and caked with mud, and his face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat that did little to protect him from the storm. Samuel narrowed his eyes. He had seen many travelers pass through these parts, but this man was different. He seemed desperate. There was something in his posture, the way he leaned forward against the wind, that told Samuel he was not just lost, he was running. Samuel hesitated. He could call out, demand the man leave, or even alert the local authorities. But as he watched, the man stumbled again and nearly fell. Something inside Samuel stirred, a mixture of curiosity and compassion. He had always been a fair man, willing to help those in need, even if it brought danger. After a moment of indecision, he stepped forward and raised his voice over the howl of the wind. "Hey, you there! Come here!" The man stopped and looked up, revealing a face partially covered in sand and sweat. His eyes were dark, sharp, and filled with a mixture of fear and calculation. He studied Samuel silently for a long moment, before slowly nodding, as if acknowledging that he had no choice. He moved toward the ranch, each step measured, careful, almost wary of traps that weren't there. Samuel approached him cautiously, keeping one hand on his rifle but lowering it enough to show he meant no harm. "You're hurt," he said. "Come inside. You can rest. You'll get no help out here in this storm." The man hesitated. His gaze flicked to the darkening sky, then back to Samuel. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded again and followed Samuel toward the small ranch house. The wind gusted around them, slamming the door as they entered. Inside, the warmth of the house was a relief. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a soft glow on the wooden walls, and the scent of fresh bread Samuel had baked earlier mingled with the smoke from the fireplace. Samuel guided the man to a chair near the fire. "Sit here. You need water and food." He poured a cup of water from a jug and handed it over. The man drank slowly, deliberately, as if every swallow required concentration. Samuel watched him carefully, noticing the way he flinched at the firelight. the way his eyes darted to every corner. There was caution there, a sharpness that suggested he had been running for a long time, hiding from people who wanted to find him. "I'm Samuel Harding," he said quietly. "You don't have to tell me your name if you don't want to, but I can help you." The man finally spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "Taye," he said. "My name is Taye." Samuel nodded.
"All right, Ty. You're safe here for now."
"Let me get you cleaned up and some food." Over the next hour, Samuel tended to Taye's injuries. He cleaned a cut on the man's arm, wrapped it carefully, and offered him some bread and stew. Taye ate slowly, still watching Samuel with an intensity that made him seem almost like a predator in repose. But there was also exhaustion, an unmistakable weariness that spoke of long days spent running, hiding, and surviving. Finally, Samuel prepared a bed in a spare room. He pulled back the blankets, inviting Taye to rest. Taye looked at him and said something that made Samuel pause. "You gave me your bed, rancher. Get ready for what comes next," he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made Samuel's stomach tighten. Samuel froze. He wasn't sure if it was a warning or a promise, but there was no anger in Taye's eyes, only a quiet certainty. The words lingered in the room, hanging heavy in the air like the storm outside. Samuel nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Rest now. We'll face whatever comes next together, if it comes." Taye climbed into the bed, still dressed, and lay down, closing his eyes. Samuel left the room and returned to the porch, watching the storm rage across the desert. The wind howled like a living creature, sand stinging his face, but Samuel felt a strange sense of anticipation mixed with dread. Something had shifted. The quiet, predictable life he had known was about to change, and he could feel it in his bones. He thought about Taye's words repeatedly. Who was this man? Why had he been running? And what did he mean by what comes next? Samuel had lived long enough to know that nothing in the desert happened without reason. Every choice, every action had consequences. And now, by giving shelter to a stranger, he had stepped into a story that was bigger than himself. The storm raged through the night. Rain battered the roof, lightning flashed over the hills, and thunder shook the ground. Inside, Taye slept fitfully, murmuring under his breath while Samuel sat by the fire listening. He felt a mix of fear, curiosity, and resolve. One thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the desert washed and glistening under the first rays of sunlight. The sky was a pale blue, dotted with clouds drifting lazily. And Samuel stepped outside and surveyed his land, noting how the cattle had huddled together for warmth, how the wind had rearranged the sand, and how the world seemed both familiar and strange. Taye emerged from the house shortly after, stretching and scanning the horizon. Samuel watched him carefully, noticing the way he moved, alert, graceful, ready for anything. He knew that this man carried stories, dangers, and secrets that could change everything on the ranch. But for now, they would share this moment of quiet, each aware that the other was watching, learning, preparing. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Samuel could not shake Taye's warning, "Get ready for what comes next." It was a simple sentence, yet it held the weight of storms, deserts, and survival. Samuel felt the truth of it settle deep within him. Life on the ranch would never be the same. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the hills in soft shades of gold and orange. The storm from the night before had left the air clean and sharp, the sand sparkling where the rain had washed it. Samuel Harding stepped outside his small porch and took a deep breath. The world seemed calm, almost peaceful, yet he knew that the quiet could not last. He glanced toward the barn, then back at the house, thinking about Taye. The Apache man had slept most of the night, his presence both strange and unsettling, yet oddly comforting. There was something in him that Samuel could not quite understand, a mix of strength and caution, of danger and need. Taye emerged from the house shortly after, rubbing his eyes and stretching his long, lean body. His clothes were still damp from the storm, and his boots had traces of mud, but he moved with an ease that suggested he was used to surviving in harsh conditions. He did not speak immediately, instead walking toward the corral and surveying the land with careful, watchful eyes. Samuel followed him quietly, curious about what the man was thinking. "You know," Samuel said, breaking the silence, "most people wouldn't risk coming out here in a storm. Least of all, someone in your condition." Tae glanced at him briefly. His eyes, dark and sharp, seemed to measure Samuel in a single look. Then he returned to his inspection of the corral, speaking in a low, calm voice. "Storms don't care about people. They come and go, whether you're ready or not. You survive by being ready." Samuel nodded, sensing that Tae's words carried more meaning than he was letting on. He wanted to ask questions, but he also understood that Tae would reveal nothing unless he chose to. For now, he decided to give the man space. The hours passed slowly. Samuel went about his daily chores, repairing fences, checking the cattle, and tending to the horses. Tae remained close by, sometimes helping, sometimes standing silently and observing. There was an intelligence in him, a careful watchfulness that made Samuel both wary and intrigued. He noticed the way Tae examined the tools, the gates, and even the layout of the ranch, as if preparing for possibilities Samuel had never imagined. By midday, Samuel had prepared a simple meal of beans, bread, and salted meat. He set a plate in front of Tae, who ate slowly, deliberately. The silence between them was comfortable in a strange way, punctuated only by the occasional sound of a bird or the lowing of a cow. Samuel wanted to speak, to break the tension, but each time he opened his mouth, Tae's steady, watchful gaze stopped him. Finally, Samuel asked cautiously, "You've been running a long time, haven't you?" Tae paused, chewing slowly. "Long enough," he said. "I've learned who to trust and who to avoid. The desert teaches you that quickly." Samuel nodded again. He did not press further. He could feel that Tae had secrets. Secrets that were heavy, dangerous, and perhaps even tragic. Yet there was no anger in the man, only caution, intelligence, and the quiet determination of someone who had been forced to survive against impossible odds. As the afternoon wore on, Samuel noticed signs of movement outside the ranch. Footprints in the sand, partly washed away by the storm, suggested that someone, or more than one person, had been near his property. He pointed them out to Tae. "They might be looking for you," Samuel said quietly. Tae examined the prints carefully. His expression did not change, but Samuel saw a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps someone else is passing through. Either way, it doesn't matter. You prepare, and you watch." Samuel felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something about the way Tae spoke, calm, precise, certain, that made him realize that danger was closer than he had imagined. He had always lived a careful, predictable life, and now he was being drawn into a world of uncertainty and risk. The afternoon turned into evening, and Samuel decided to take Tae on a walk around the perimeter of the ranch. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted with dry shrubs and rocky outcroppings. The sun sank low, turning the sand into a sea of gold and crimson. They walked in silence, the only sounds the crunch of their boots on the sand and the distant cry of a hawk circling above. Tae spoke first. "You have a good land here," he said. "It's quiet. Safe, mostly. But quiet is dangerous, too. People notice what's out of place. Someone like me will be noticed." Samuel frowned. "You mean the law?" Tae shook his head slightly. "Not just the law. Others, too. People who think they have a right to punish me. People who want to use fear to control others. They don't care about truth. They care about control." Samuel felt a tightness in his chest. He had never been involved in anything like this. His life had been simple, orderly, safe. Yet now, by offering shelter to Tae, he had stepped into something much larger, something he could not easily control. They returned to the house as the sun disappeared completely, leaving the desert in the soft glow of twilight. Samuel lit the fireplace, and they sat together in the small, warm room. The fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, and Samuel could feel the tension in the air. Tae seemed at ease, yet there was a constant alertness in his posture. a readiness that never faded. After a while, Samuel asked the question that had been on his mind since the morning. "Why are you running?" Taya looked into the fire for a long moment before answering. "I made choices," he said finally. "Some good, some not so good. And then I was blamed for things I did not do. People wanted to make me pay whether I deserved it or not. I had to survive. That is all." Samuel nodded slowly. He could understand that. Life had a way of punishing the innocent and rewarding the careful. Yet he could see the truth in Ty's eyes. This was a man who had endured more than most, who had faced danger, betrayal, and loss, and yet had survived. They ate a simple dinner, and Ty continued to talk, revealing small pieces of his life, enough to understand him but not enough to fully know him. He spoke of the land he had traveled through, the people he had encountered, and the skills he had learned to survive. Samuel listened, fascinated by the man's resourcefulness and resilience. As night fell, Samuel prepared the spare room again, making sure it was comfortable. Ty lay down, but instead of sleeping immediately, he sat quietly, staring at the ceiling, thinking. Samuel noticed, and he wondered what passed through the man's mind. He had a sense that Ty was planning, considering possibilities, and preparing for whatever came next. Samuel felt a mixture of admiration and unease. He had offered shelter to a stranger, a man whose past was unknown and whose future was uncertain. But he could not help feeling that he had made the right choice. Compassion, he realized, sometimes came with risk, but it was a risk worth taking. Before leaving Ty to rest, Samuel spoke quietly. "Tomorrow, we'll make sure the ranch is secure, and we'll talk more. You don't have to do this alone." Taya turned his head slightly, his dark eyes meeting Samuel's. There was a faint smile, almost imperceptible, but it carried gratitude, respect, and an understanding that went deeper than words. "Thank you," he said. "But tomorrow brings its own challenges. Be ready." Samuel left the room and sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He thought about the words, about the man who had appeared in the storm, and about the life that was changing around him. He could not yet see what the future held, but he knew one thing: he would face it, and he would face it with courage. Outside, the desert was quiet, the stars shining like distant fires in the sky. The storm had passed, but his presence lingered in the sand, the air, and in the minds of those who had survived it. Samuel felt a deep connection to this land, to the life he had built, and to the man who now shared it with him. And somewhere deep in the desert, unseen, the world was moving, and the challenges that Taya had warned about were slowly drawing closer. Samuel knew he had to be ready, that his life had changed in ways he could not yet understand. But for the first time in a long while, he felt alive, alert, and part of something greater than himself. The night passed slowly, and Samuel sat by the fire long after Tay had fallen asleep. He thought about the man, about the storm, and about the words that had been spoken. Get ready for what comes next. Samuel did not yet know what awaited them, but he was determined to face it, whatever it might be. The desert was quiet. But quiet, Samuel knew, was never safe. The morning sun rose slowly over Samuel Harding's ranch, casting long golden rays across the dusty land. The desert seemed calm, almost deceptively peaceful, but Samuel felt a tension in the air he could not ignore. The storm had passed, but its traces remained, footprints in the sand, bent branches, and the faint smell of wet earth that reminded him how fragile safety could be. Tay was already awake, sitting quietly near the fire, sharpening a small knife with careful, precise movements. His dark eyes scanned the room, alert to every sound and shadow, and Samuel realized once again that this was a man who never truly relaxed. Even in safety, he was ready. Samuel moved silently to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, but his mind was elsewhere. The tracks from the previous day had not faded entirely. Someone had been near the ranch, perhaps searching for Taye, perhaps just passing by. But the uncertainty gnawed at Samuel. He had never been involved in anything like this before. His life had always been orderly, predictable. Now, that predictability had been shattered by a man he barely knew and a warning that seemed to hang over him like a storm cloud. Get ready for what comes next. When breakfast was ready, Samuel set 2 plates on the small wooden table. Taya did not speak immediately, but he observed Samuel's every movement with keen attention. When he finally spoke, it was in the quiet, measured tone Samuel had come to recognize. "You are careful," Taya said. "I can see it in the way you move, in the way you watch. That is good. You will need it." Samuel sat down, taking a bite of the bread. "I've lived this way for a long time. Careful keeps you alive out here. But I never imagined danger would come to my door like this." Taya's eyes softened slightly, though the sharpness never left them. "Danger is always near, even when you cannot see it. The desert teaches that lesson every day. Those who ignore it, they do not survive."
Samuel nodded slowly. He felt the weight of Taya's words but did not yet fully understand them.
He had given shelter to a stranger, a man running from unknown threats, and he realized that he had stepped into a world far larger and more dangerous than anything he had experienced on the ranch. After breakfast, Samuel and Tay went out to inspect the perimeter of the ranch again. The desert was bright and hot under the morning sun, and the wind carried a dry, sharp scent that stung their nostrils. Samuel noticed more tracks, fresh ones this time, leading toward the west side of the property. He pointed them out to Ty. "They might be looking for you," Samuel said quietly, a hint of worry in his voice. Taya knelt, examining the tracks closely. His fingers traced the shapes in the sand, and his eyes narrowed as he studied them. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "or perhaps someone is testing the land, seeing who is here. Either way, preparation is the only protection. You must watch and think ahead." Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. He had never considered that life on the ranch could involve such threats. Yet the truth of Taya's words was undeniable. The calm of the desert was an illusion. Danger could arrive at any moment, and those who were unprepared would be at the mercy of forces they could not control. Over the next few hours, Taya began to teach Samuel how to anticipate threats. They checked the barn and the storage shed, securing supplies and identifying potential escape routes. Taya moved with the ease of someone who had lived his life in constant danger, and Samuel watched closely, learning from the man's experience. "You must think like the desert," Taya said at one point, pausing to adjust a rope that secured a gate.
"It is always watching, always testing."
"You cannot ignore it, or it will punish you. People are the same. Those who come with ill intent will look for weakness, never show it." Samuel absorbed the lesson, feeling both admiration and unease. He had always considered himself capable, but Taya's presence reminded him that survival required more than skill. It required awareness, adaptability, and sometimes courage beyond comfort. By midday, they had finished securing the ranch. The sun was high and hot, beating down on the desert floor. Samuel wiped sweat from his brow and looked at Tay, who stood silently, scanning the horizon. "You know a lot about surviving," Samuel said. "Have you always lived like this?" Taya's lips curved slightly, a faint shadow of a smile. "I have learned. The world does not give second chances freely. You take what you can, or you lose everything. And even then, sometimes you must run." Samuel considered that carefully. The man before him had survived storms, enemies, and the harsh desert. Yet there was a sadness in his eyes, a weight that spoke of things left behind, of dangers narrowly escaped.
Samuel realized that Tay's life had been a constant struggle and that his own problems, small as they seemed, were nothing compared to what this man had endured.
As the afternoon wore on, Samuel returned to the house to fetch some water. When he returned, he noticed Taya staring into the distance, his posture tense, his eyes sharp. Samuel followed his gaze and saw a cloud of dust rising in the distance, moving steadily toward the ranch. Horses. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. "They're coming," Taya said quietly, almost to himself. "We have little time." Samuel felt a surge of adrenaline. He had not realized that the threat was so close. "Who is coming?" he asked. Taya did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved quickly, instructing Samuel to gather what supplies they could carry if they needed to leave the ranch. I do not know yet if they are friends or foes, Taya said, his voice calm but urgent. We must be ready for both. They worked swiftly, gathering water, food, and tools. Taya showed Samuel how to leave subtle signals for communication, how to create distractions, and how to move quietly without alerting others. Samuel marveled at Taya's knowledge and skill, realizing that this man had lived through dangers he could scarcely imagine. As the sun began to sink behind the hills, the figures on horseback grew clearer. Samuel counted 6 men riding toward the ranch, their faces grim, their intentions uncertain. Fear mixed with determination in Samuel's chest. He had never been involved in such danger, yet he felt a strange resolve. He would protect his home, and he would protect the man he had sheltered, no matter the cost. Taya knelt near the fence, scanning the approaching riders. They are lawmen, he said finally, or at least men who claim to be. They do not understand the truth, only what they are told. We must make them doubt, confuse them, and buy time. That is all we can do for now. Samuel nodded. His hands trembled slightly, but he felt a growing confidence in Taya's leadership. Together, they prepared. They moved silently, checking the gates, positioning themselves near hidden areas, and readying themselves for whatever confrontation might come. As night fell, the riders were close enough for Samuel to hear the clatter of their horses' hooves against the hard desert ground. The tension was almost unbearable, yet there was a strange focus in Samuel's mind. Every instruction from Ty was precise, every movement deliberate. Samuel felt the weight of responsibility, but he also felt the strength of partnership. He was no longer alone. The night deepened, and the first confrontation seemed inevitable. Samuel stood by the barn, rifle in hand, listening as the horses slowed and men whispered to one another. Taya's presence beside him was calm, steady, and reassuring. Samuel realized that survival was not just about skill or strength, but about trust. He trusted Tai, and for the first time, he believed that together, they might survive whatever came next. Tay leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. They will test us, but do not be afraid. We act, we watch, we survive. That is all. Nothing more. Samuel nodded, taking a deep breath. He could feel his heart pounding, but he also felt clarity. The ranch, the desert, and the man he had sheltered, all of it depended on their choices in the next hours. He felt ready in a way he had never felt before, ready to face the unknown, to face the danger, to do whatever was necessary to protect what mattered. And in the dark, under the watchful eyes of the desert, Samuel Harding understood the truth of Tay's warning. Get ready for what comes next. The horses drew nearer, the riders now within shouting distance. Samuel's fingers tightened on his rifle. He and Taya exchanged a brief, meaningful glance. There was no turning back. The chase and the test of their survival had begun. Night had fully descended on Samuel Harding's ranch, turning the desert into a shadowy world where every movement seemed amplified and every sound carried a warning. The stars shone dimly behind drifting clouds, and the wind whispered across the sand, bending the few scraggly trees and rattling the wooden fences. Samuel crouched near the barn, his rifle steady in his hands, his eyes straining to see any movement in the darkness. Beside him, Taye was calm, almost unnervingly so, his sharp gaze sweeping the perimeter of the property. Samuel realized once again that this man's life had been shaped by danger, and that his skills were the difference between survival and failure. The riders were close now. Samuel could make out the glint of their weapons in the dim moonlight and hear the subtle sounds of conversation, low, urgent, careful. They were men looking for Taye, but they did not know what they were about to face. Samuel's heart pounded, but he forced himself to breathe steadily. Fear was natural, he reminded himself, but it could not control him. He had made a choice to protect this man, and now he would see it through. Taye leaned closer and whispered, "We create distractions. They must not know our strength until it is too late. Follow my lead." Samuel nodded. He had spent the day learning from Taye, watching him move, listening to his quiet wisdom. He trusted the man now. even though he barely knew him. Together, they slipped silently through the shadows, positioning themselves near the barn and the storage shed. Taya crouched low, pointing to a pile of dry wood.
We use this.
They will see smoke first, not us. As the riders approached, Samuel's nerves tightened. One of them dismounted, stepping carefully over the sand. His voice called out, sharp and commanding, "Tai, come out where we can see you. No harm will come if you surrender." Taya's eyes narrowed. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he motioned to Samuel, and they began their first move, a calculated distraction. Samuel tossed a small rock toward the far side of the corral. It clattered loudly against a fence post, drawing the attention of two riders. Immediately, Taya struck a small piece of flint against the pile of dry wood. Sparks flew, and soon smoke curled upward in a thin gray column. The riders' attention shifted. Shouts rang out as they tried to assess the source of the smoke. Samuel felt a surge of adrenaline. This was their moment. He moved silently to a better position near the barn, rifle ready. Tay was already moving, light and quick, slipping through the shadows like a shadow himself. Samuel followed his lead, remembering every small detail Tay was taught him about patience, observation, and timing. The confrontation escalated quickly. One of the riders, frustrated by the smoke and confusion, tried to approach the barn. Taya was already there, crouched low and ready. In a quick, fluid movement, he created a false trail, leading the rider away from the barn and into a narrow path between two rocky outcroppings. Samuel watched in awe as Tay used every element of the desert, rocks, shadows, and the wind, to his advantage. Meanwhile, Samuel realized that he had a role to play. He stayed hidden, ready to intervene if necessary, but following Taya's strategy with careful precision. His hands were steady now, his mind clear, even as the danger pressed closer. He had never experienced anything like this, yet he felt a growing confidence. The desert had tested him, and now he was learning to meet that test. Hours seemed to pass like minutes. The riders grew more frustrated, shouting and searching, but Taya's careful planning and swift movements kept them off balance. Samuel witnessed the man's skill in survival, in reading people, and in turning fear into strategy. He realized that Taya had not just survived because of strength or cunning, but because he understood the patterns of danger and the weaknesses of those who pursued him. At one point, two riders nearly discovered their hiding place. Samuel's heart jumped, but Taya remained calm. With a small gesture, he directed Samuel to stay still. Then, in one quick motion, Taya created another distraction, sending a cloud of dust into the path of the riders and forcing them to retreat temporarily. Samuel felt a mixture of fear and admiration. This was more than survival. It was a dance of skill and intelligence, and he was lucky to witness it firsthand. The confrontation reached its peak when the lead rider, frustrated by the repeated distractions, dismounted and approached the barn directly. Samuel could hear his footsteps, careful but deliberate. Taya whispered, "Now," and both men moved with silent precision. Samuel followed Taya's lead, staying low and using every shadow for cover. When the rider reached the barn, Taya struck again, creating another diversion that sent the man stumbling. Samuel had a clear view now, and felt a strange mix of tension and control. He realized that he was not just defending the ranch. He was part of a team, part of a strategy, and part of a moment that would determine both their fates. The riders were now in full retreat, disoriented and frustrated. Taya moved quickly, guiding Samuel to a hidden path behind the barn. "They will regroup," Taya said quietly. "We cannot stay exposed. We must wait for the right moment to act again." Samuel nodded, feeling a strange exhilaration. He had faced danger before, but never like this. The experience was terrifying, yes, but it also felt alive in a way he had never known. He understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. And with Taya's guidance, he had learned how to turn fear into a tool for survival. As the night wore on, they secured the ranch further, reinforcing doors and gates, and setting subtle signals to warn of any approach. Taya moved with tireless energy, his eyes sharp, his mind alert. Samuel followed, learning from every action, every movement, every decision. He realized that this night had changed him. He was no longer just a rancher living in isolation. He was a participant in a story of survival, trust, and courage. Finally, after what felt like endless hours, the immediate threat passed. The riders had retreated, at least for now, and the ranch was safe. Samuel and Taye stood together outside, the desert quiet and still under the moonlight. They both knew this was only temporary. The danger would return, as it always did in the desert. But for now, they had survived, and they had learned the strength of their partnership. Samuel looked at Taye, admiration and respect in his eyes. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly. "I've never seen anyone move like you, think like you, survive like you." Taye gave a faint smile, almost imperceptible, but it carried both gratitude and understanding. "You did well too," he said. "You learned quickly. You watched. You waited. You acted when needed. That is how survival works. Together, we are stronger than they expect." Samuel nodded, feeling the truth in Taye's words. He had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and he had endured. But he had also discovered a strength within himself, a courage he had not known he possessed, and he knew that the night's events would stay with him forever, shaping his understanding of danger, trust, and resilience. As dawn approached, the desert began to brighten, and the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon. Samuel and Taye moved quietly around the ranch, checking the perimeter one last time. The night had tested them, and they had passed. But both men knew that survival was a continuous challenge, and that the desert would never truly forgive mistakes. Taye finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "They will come again, but now you are ready. You understand more. You can anticipate, plan, and act. That is the key. Never forget it." Samuel listened carefully, feeling the weight of his words. He knew that the struggle was not over, but he also knew that he was no longer alone. With Taye by his side, he felt a confidence that had been missing for years. He had faced danger, and he had endured. And he would continue to endure, no matter what came next. The desert was quiet now, but Samuel and Taye knew that silence was never permanent. They had survived the night, but the world outside the ranch was still full of uncertainty, threats, and challenges. Yet for the first time, Samuel felt ready. He had learned from Taye, adapted, and grown. And together they would face whatever came next.
The sun rose fully, painting the desert in bright, warm colors.
Samuel looked over his land, feeling both pride and caution. The ranch was safe for now, and Taye was alive and ready. They had survived the first real test, and they would survive the next. And in the quiet of the desert, Samuel heard Taye's words again, echoing in his mind, "Get ready for what comes next." The showdown had ended, for now, but the story was far from over. The morning after the confrontation, the desert felt calm again, but Samuel Harding knew that peace was fragile. The sun rose slowly, warming the sand and lighting up the ranch with soft golden rays. The storm from days before seemed like a distant memory now, yet its impact lingered in every step, every shadow, and every sound around the property. Samuel walked quietly through the corral, checking the fences and making sure the cattle were safe. He moved slowly, deliberately, aware that every action mattered. The night's events had changed everything, but life went on, and the ranch needed tending. Taye had been quiet all morning, sitting on a low rock near the house, gazing toward the distant hills. Samuel noticed a mixture of calm and alertness in the man's eyes, as if he were always listening to the desert, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Samuel approached him cautiously. "The night went well," he said. "We survived." Taye nodded slowly. "Yes, but survival is not enough. You must always be ready. Those who think a single night proves safety will be surprised. Danger does not rest, and neither should you." Samuel understood the truth in Taye's words. The Apache man had lived through storms, threats, and betrayal. His life had been a constant test, and he had learned to act quickly, anticipate danger, and rely on skill and intelligence rather than luck. Samuel had seen it firsthand, and he felt a deep respect for Ty. More than respect, a sense of awe.
I've learned a lot from you,
Samuel said quietly. I never imagined that I could move, think, and survive like this. You've changed my view of the desert and life. Taye's eyes softened, and for the first time, Samuel saw a faint smile on the man's face. And you've learned quickly. You watched, you listened, and you acted. That is why we survived. Remember this: courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is acting despite it. For the next few hours, Samuel and Taye walked through the ranch together, inspecting the fences, checking the animals, and making small improvements to secure their home. They worked silently at times, letting the peaceful morning surround them. But there was an unspoken understanding that the desert was always watching. Samuel felt a mixture of pride and caution. He had survived the confrontation, but he knew the desert was never truly safe. As the day wore on, Samuel realized that the time would come when Taye would have to leave. He had given the man shelter, helped him survive, but he could not keep him forever. The Apache man's path was not one that could end at a single ranch. It was a life of constant movement, of evading danger and surviving on skill and knowledge. Samuel did not voice this thought aloud, but it lingered in his mind like the distant echo of the storm. Finally, as the sun began to lower toward the horizon, Taye approached Samuel. I must leave soon, he said quietly. This place has been a refuge, but I cannot stay. The desert calls, and my path continues.
Samuel felt a pang of sadness.
He had grown accustomed to Taye's presence, to the sense of partnership and shared purpose. I understand, he said. But I will miss you. You've taught me more than I ever thought possible. You've changed me. Taye looked at him for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting both gratitude and respect. You gave me your bed, your shelter, your trust. Few would do that for someone they barely know. That is why I survived. And that is why I leave with respect for you. You are stronger than you know, Samuel Harding. Do not forget that. Samuel nodded, feeling the weight of those words. He realized that Taye's life had been full of challenges, yet the man had retained a sense of honor, resilience, and intelligence that had carried him through every danger. Samuel felt humbled by the experience and grateful for the lessons he had learned. They spent the evening preparing for Taye's departure. Samuel provided food, water, and supplies for the journey, ensuring that the Apache man could leave safely. Taye inspected everything carefully, nodding in approval. There was a quiet understanding between them, a bond forged in danger, trust, and shared survival. When the time came to part ways, the desert was bathed in the warm glow of sunset. Taye stood at the edge of the property, looking toward the distant hills. Samuel felt a mixture of pride, admiration, and sorrow. Be safe, he said. Taye turned to him, his expression serious but calm. You gave me your bed. Now keep your heart ready, Samuel. The desert remembers those who help others. One day you may see me again or you may not. But know this: our paths were meant to cross, and you have learned to face danger and survive. That is enough. With that, Taye mounted a horse that had been left for him near the edge of the ranch and rode toward the hills, moving like a shadow through the desert. Samuel watched until the figure disappeared over the horizon, leaving only the sound of the wind and the distant call of a hawk. The ranch felt both empty and alive, as if the land itself had absorbed the presence of the Apache man and would remember it long after he was gone. Samuel walked slowly back to the house, feeling the weight of the past days settle on him. He reflected on the events that had unfolded, the storm, Taye's arrival, the confrontation with the riders, and the lessons learned. He realized that he had grown stronger, wiser, and more aware of the fragile balance between trust, danger, and survival. That night, Samuel sat on the porch looking out over the desert. The stars shone brightly and the wind carried the faint scent of sand and earth. He thought about Taye's words, about the courage it took to survive, and about the importance of trust and preparation. He knew that life on the ranch would continue, but he would never forget the lessons of the past days. In the following weeks, Samuel returned to his routine, tending the land, caring for the animals, and maintaining the fences. Yet the experience had left a lasting impression. He moved with greater awareness, observing the land, the sky, and the subtle signs of change. He thought often of Tae and wondered where the Apache man's journey had taken him. Though he would likely never know, Samuel felt a deep sense of respect and gratitude for the man who had entered his life and taught him so much. As time passed, Samuel shared the story sparingly with neighbors, careful to leave out details that might endanger anyone or reveal too much. The ranch continued to thrive, the cattle grew, and the land remained a place of both beauty and challenge. But Samuel carried with him the memory of the stormy nights, the tense confrontations, and the quiet lessons of courage and survival that Tae had imparted. One evening, long after Tai had disappeared into the desert, Samuel stood on the porch and looked toward the horizon. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and orange, and the wind whispered through the mesquite trees. He felt a sense of peace, tempered with awareness. Life was fragile, the desert was unpredictable, and danger could appear at any moment. But he was ready. He had learned to trust, to act, and to survive, and he knew that in some way Tae's presence would always remain with him, a reminder of courage, honor, and the strength found in unexpected companionship. Samuel smiled faintly to himself, thinking of the man who had come into his life, shared his bed, and left behind a lesson that would never fade. "Thank you," he whispered to the desert, to Tai, and to the life that had tested him in ways he could never have imagined. And so, life on the ranch continued. The desert remained wild, unpredictable, and unforgiving. But Samuel Harding was changed. He moved through each day with patience, awareness, and courage, remembering always the Apache man who had taught him that survival was about more than strength. It was about wisdom, trust, and the willingness to face whatever comes next. Though Tae had disappeared into the vast, unforgiving desert, Samuel knew the man's spirit would endure, just as the desert itself endured, unbroken and timeless. The ranch, the land, and the lessons learned would remain, shaping Samuel's life forever. And somewhere, far across the hills and valleys, Tae would ride, free, strong, and alive, carrying with him the memory of the night he had spent at Samuel Harding's ranch and the bond forged between two men from very different worlds, united by courage, trust, and survival. The desert was quiet, yet it hummed with life and possibility. Samuel stood on the porch one last time as the sun dipped below the horizon, knowing that life would always bring new challenges, new storms, and new paths. And he was ready, because he had learned from Tae, because he had survived, because the desert, the land, and life itself had taught him that courage was not about the absence of fear, it was about the strength to face it, every day, no matter what comes next.